Dr. Phil here. I am here again with Baghead, and here to talk to you about some Chromebook issues. Students have been coming in with damaged displays, and we found out that what's happening is that they're carrying it by the display and not by the base. So be sure you're carrying that Chromebook by the base. We're going to put up a picture here of some damage for that, and you'll notice on there where the person's blue thumb is, they were carrying it right at that point with their thumb, and you can see where that's where the damage starts and then spreads out across the screen. So just be aware of that, and don't be carrying it around the house this way, but always carry it with the base. The other thing I wanted to point out to you as well is if you're having issues with your Chromebook, again, one of the nice little things you can do is hold the refresh button, that's the one with the circle with the arrow at the top row of your keyboard, and then press the power button, and that'll do a forced restart. So go ahead and give that a shot if you're having any issues with Zoom or anything like that, and that should clear up some of those problems. Otherwise, please give us a call. There's someone at the help desk from 9 to 3. Our number is 402-412-2899. And we'll see you later. Thank you, Cards. Have a great day.
All right. Hello, all you cool cats and kittens. We are back with our second week of self-compassion. I am, again, Emily Hamstra, and I am a therapist at Heartland Counseling. And my main area is working with middle school students at South Sioux City Middle School. Last week, we read from our book, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. We read through chapter 1, which was titled Discovering Self-Compassion. There were some exercises at the end that I shared with you. So hopefully if you had some time to do that, you were able to get those done and reflect on those with yourself, or if you happen to see a therapist or anything like that. And it's fine, you know, if it's just something that you do on your own in a journal or self-reflection. But today we're going to be starting on chapter 2, which is Ending the Madness. And again, there'll be some exercises at the end for you to try if you feel like you're ready and able to do that. So chapter 2 starts out with a quote. What is this self inside us, the silent observer, severe and speechless critic, who can terrorize us and urge us on to futile activity, and in the end judge us still more severely for the errors into which his own reproaches drove us? By T.S. Eliot from the Elder Statesman. So before examining self-compassion in more detail, it's worth considering what our more habitual, unhealthy states of mind look like. As we begin to see the workings of our psyches more clearly, we start to recognize how much we skew our perceptions of the world in order to feel better about ourselves. It's as if we're continually airbrushing our self-image to make it more to our liking, even if it radically distorts reality. At the same time, we mercilessly criticize ourselves when we fall short of our ideals, reacting so harshly that reality is equally distorted in the opposite direction. The result can look like a Salvador Dali picture. As we first start to learn about self-compassion as a viable alternative to this madness, it's easy for us to end up judging our ego dysfunctions themselves. I'm so full of myself, I should be more humble. Or else, I get so down on myself, I should be more kind and self-accepting. It's very important to stop condemning yourself for these patterns, fruitless as they may be. The only way to truly have compassion for yourself is to realize that these neurotic ego cycles are not of your own choosing. They are natural and universal. Put simply, we come by our dysfunctions honestly. They are a part of human inheritance. So why do we vacillate between self-serving distortions and ruthless self-criticism? Because we want to be safe. Our development, both as a species and as individuals, is predicated on basic survival instincts. Because human beings tend to live in hierarchical social groups, those who are dominant within their group are less likely to be rejected and have more access to valued resources. In the same way, those who accept their subordinate status also have a secure place in the social order. We can't take the risk of being outcast by the people who keep us out of harm's way. Not if we want to stay alive. Surely this behavior need not be judged. How could the desire to be safe and secure be anything other than normal and natural for any living organism? The next section is the need to feel better than others. Garrison Keillor famously describes the fictional town of Lake Wobegon as a place where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average. For this reason, psychologists sometimes use the phrase Lake Wobegon effect to describe the common tendency to think of oneself as superior to others on a long list of desirable personality traits. Research has shown that fully 85% of students think that they're above average in terms of getting along with others, for instance. 94% of college faculty members think they're better teachers than their colleagues. And 90% of drivers think they're more skilled than their roadmates. Even people who recently caused a car accident think they're superior drivers. Research shows that people tend to think they're funnier, more logical, more popular, better looking, nicer, more trustworthy, wiser, and more intelligent than others. Ironically, most people also think they're above average in the ability to view themselves objectively. Logically speaking, of course, if self-perceptions were accurate, only half of all people would say they're above average on any particular trait, the other half admitting they were below average. But this almost never happens. It's unacceptable to be average in our society. So pretty much everybody wears a pair of rose-colored glasses, at least when they're looking in the mirror. How else can we explain all those American Idol contestants with marginal talent who seem so genuinely shocked when they're booted off the show? One might assume that the tendency to see oneself as better and superior to other people is primarily found in individualistic cultures, such as the United States, where self-promotion is a way of life. Where else could Muhammad Ali have gotten away with the line, "I'm not the greatest, I'm the double greatest"? In more collectivistic cultures where conceit is frowned upon, aren't people more modest? The answer is, yes, they think they're more modest. Research suggests that all people self-enhance, but only on those traits valued by their culture. Whereas Americans tend to think they're more independent, self-reliant, original, and leader-like than the average American, collectivist cultures tend to think they're more cooperative, self-sacrificing, respectful, and humble than their peers. I'm more modest than you are. It's the same almost everywhere. And we don't just see ourselves as better, we also see others as worse. Psychologists use the term downward social comparison to describe our tendency to see others in a negative light, so that we can feel superior by contrast. If I'm trying to gild my own ego, you can be sure I'll try to tarnish yours. So you're rich, but look at that bald spot. This tendency was brilliantly illustrated in the film Mean Girls. The movie was actually based on the nonfiction book Queen Bees and Wannabes, which describes how female cliques in high school maintain their social status. Mean Girls tells the story of three beautiful, rich, and well-dressed girls who seem to have it all. Certainly they think so. As one says, "I'm sorry that people are so jealous of me. I can't help it that I'm so popular." That was Regina George, for those of you that have seen the movie. The girls, however, are hated despite their popularity. The clique keeps something called the Burn Book, a top-secret notebook filled with rumors, secrets, and gossip about the other girls in the school. When the existence of the book is revealed to the school body at large, it ends up causing a riot. The film was a blockbuster hit and struck a huge chord with audiences. While exaggerated for comedic effect, the mean girl or boy phenomenon is something we're all too familiar with. Although most of us don't go to the lengths of keeping a burn book, it's very common to look for flaws and shortcomings in others as a way to feel superior about ourselves. Why else do we love pictures of stars spilling out of their swimsuits, making fashion flubs, or having a bad hair day? This approach, while ego gratifying for a few moments, has some serious drawbacks. When we are always seeing the worst in others, our perception becomes obscured by a dark cloud of negativity. Our thoughts become malevolent, and this is the mental world we then inhabit. Downward social comparisons actually harm rather than help us. By putting others down to puff ourselves up, we are cutting off our nose to spite our face, creating and maintaining the state of disconnection and isolation we actually want to avoid. So there's an exercise in here. It says, seeing yourself as you are. So there's the first page of the exercise. And there's, there we go, the second part. So I'll read these out loud. And if you want to get out a pen and paper, or make note of this. We're at about 9 minutes and 18-ish seconds when we start with this, and you can come back and do these exercises. So it says, seeing yourself as you are. Many people think they're above average on personal traits that society values, like being friendlier, smarter, more attractive than average. This tendency helps us to feel good about ourselves, but it also can lead us to feel more separate and cut off from others. This exercise is designed to help us see ourselves clearly and accept ourselves exactly as we are. All people have culturally valued traits that might be considered better than average, some traits that are just average, and some that are below average. Can we accept this reality with kindness and equanimity? So the first part A says, list 5 culturally valued traits for which you are above average. So think about, or you can even Google valued traits in American culture or traits valued in individualistic cultures. And if you want to even be more specific, you can look at your specific town or geographical region, maybe even looking more closely at your family, your school, whatever would make the most sense and be the easiest place to start. And you can start with maybe a smaller system in this activity and maybe broaden it to include those larger systems because it's not homogeneous across the entire United States. Maybe the northern states or eastern states or western states or Midwest, whatever it is, have slightly different cultural values and things that we might value different than other regions. So but basically, it's just listing 5 culturally valued traits for which you're above average, 5 culturally valued traits for which you're just about average, and 5 culturally valued traits for which you're below average. And then part D is consider the full range of traits listed above. Can you accept all these facets of yourself? Being human does not mean being better than others. Being human means you encompass the full range of the human experience. The positive, the negative, and the neutral. Being human means you are average in many ways. Can you celebrate the experience of being alive on this planet in all your complexity and wonder? The next section is, why is it so hard to stop beating ourselves up? So perhaps more perplexing than the desire to think well of ourselves is our equally strong tendency towards self-criticism. Now, I've noticed that people will often compete about who can have the worst go of things or who's got the most problems or the most significant problems or the hardest life. So sometimes people will themselves competing on who's suffering the most rather than who has the most. And still, it's that tendency towards I don't feel special or I don't feel connected and unique unless I have something more than average, whether it's suffering or things. So back to the book. As British novelist Anthony Powell noted, self-love seems so often unrequited. When we don't succeed in reinterpreting reality so that we feel better than others, when we're forced to finally face up to the fact that our self-image is more blemished than we would like it to be, what happens? All too often, Cruella de Vil or Mr. Hyde emerges from the shadows, attacking our imperfect selves with a surprising viciousness, and the language of our self-criticism cuts like a knife. Most of our self-critical thoughts take the form of an inner dialogue, a constant commentary and evaluation of what we're experiencing. Because there is no social censure where our inner dialogue is harsh or callous, We often talk to ourselves in an especially brutal way. You're so fat and disgusting. That was a totally stupid thing to say. You're such a loser. No wonder nobody wants you. Ouch. Yet self-abuse is incredibly common. And here's this word I'm going to show you. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Oh, maybe I will try to pronounce it. Phonausinihilification. I don't know. Defined as the habit of estimating something as worthless, is one of the longest words in the English language. The mystery of why we do it is as baffling as how to pronounce it. Perhaps our behavior becomes more understandable, however, when we remember that just like self-aggrandizement, self-criticism is a type of safety behavior designed to ensure acceptance within the larger social group. Even though the alpha dog gets to eat first, the dog that shows his belly when snarled at still gets his share. He's given a safe place in the pack, even if it's at the bottom of the pecking order. Self-criticism serves as a submissive behavior because it allows us to abase ourselves before imaginary others who pronounce judgment over us, then reward our submission with a few crumbs from the table. When we are forced to admit our failings, we can appease our mental judges by acquiescing to their negative opinions of us. Consider, for example, how people often criticize themselves in front of others. Oh, I look like a cow in this dress. I'm hopelessly inept with computers. I have the worst sense of direction of anyone I know. It's as if we're saying, I'm going to beat you to the punch and criticize myself before you can. I recognize how flawed and imperfect I am, so you don't have to cut me down and tell me what I already know. Hopefully you will then have sympathy for me instead of judging me and assure me that I'm not as bad as I think I am. This defensive posture stems from the natural desire not to be rejected and abandoned, and makes sense in terms of our most basic survival instincts. The next section is the role of parents. So the social group that is most important for survival, of course, is the immediate family. Children rely on their parents to provide food, comfort, warmth, and shelter. They instinctively trust parents to interpret the meaning of things, to help deal with scary new challenges, to keep them safe from harm's way. Children have no choice but to rely on parents in order to get by in this world. Sadly, however, many parents don't provert, but rather try to control their children through constant criticism. Many of you have grown up this way, when mothers or fathers use harsh criticism as a means to keep their kids out of trouble. Don't be so stupid, or you'll get run over by a car, or to improve their behavior. You'll never get into college if you keep getting such pathetic grades. Children assume that criticism is a useful and necessary motivational tool. As comedian Phyllis Diller notes, we spend the first 12 months of our children's lives teaching them to walk and talk, and the next 12 years telling them to sit down and shut up. Unsurprisingly, research shows that individuals who grow up with highly critical parents in childhood are much more likely to be critical towards themselves as adults. People deeply internalize their parents' criticisms, meaning that the disparaging running commentary they hear inside their own head is often a reflection of parental voices, sometimes passed down and replicated through generations. As one man told me, I just can't shut the voice up. My mom used to pick on me no matter what I did, for eating my dinner like a pig, wearing the wrong clothes to church, watching too much TV, whatever. You're never going to amount to anything, she'd say over and over again. I hated her and promised myself I'd never raise my children that way. The irony is that even though I'm a loving, supportive dad to my kids, I'm a complete jerk to myself. I tear myself to shreds all the time, even worse than my mother did. People with critical parents learn the message early on that they are so bad and flawed that they have no right to be accepted for who they are. Critical parents tend to play the role of both good and bad cop with their kid in the hope that they will be able to mold their children into who they want them to be. Punishes undesirable behavior, and good cop rewards desirable behavior. This leads to fear and distrust among children, who soon come to believe that only by being perfect will they be worthy of love. Given that perfection is impossible, children can come to expect that rejection is inevitable. While most research into the origins of self-criticism focuses on parents, the truth is that constant criticism by any significant figure in a child's life, like a grandparent, a sibling, a teacher, a coach, can lead that child to experience inner demons later on in life. I have an English friend named Kenneth who is extremely hard on himself. No matter how much success he achieves, he is continually plagued by feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, which makes sense once he talks about his childhood. Almost everyone in my life told me how crap I was. My sister was the worst. She'd scream, "You're disgusting," just because she thought I was breathing too loudly, and hide under her bed until I left the room. My mother didn't defend me, but instead often made me apologize to my sister as a way to calm her and keep the peace. The natural response of children who are being verbally pummeled is to protect them, and sometimes the surest means of defense is to have nothing to attack. In other words, children start to believe that self-criticism will prevent them from making future mistakes, thereby circumventing others' criticism. At the very least, they can blunt the force of others' criticism by making it redundant. A verbal assault doesn't have quite the same power when it merely repeats what you've already said to yourself. Next up is the role of culture. The tendency to criticize ourselves and feel worthless as a result can be traced in part to larger cultural messages. There is a well-known story about a group of Western scholars who were meeting with the Dalai Lama, who asked him how to help people suffering from low self-esteem. The Dalai Lama was confused, and the concept of self-esteem had to be explained to him. He looked around this room of educated, successful people and asked, "Who here feels low self-esteem?" Everyone looked at one another and replied, "We all do." One of the downsides of living in a culture that stresses the ethic of independence and individual achievement is that if we don't reach our ideal goals, we feel that we only have ourselves to blame. It is not only Westerners who are harshly judgmental towards themselves, of course. We recently conducted a study in the United States, Thailand, and Taiwan, and found that in Taiwan, where there is a strong Confucian ethic, there is also strong belief in self-criticism as a motivating force. The Confucian ideal is that you should criticize yourself in order to keep yourself in line, focusing on meeting the needs of others instead of yourself. In countries where Buddhism plays a stronger role in daily life, such as Thailand, people are much more self-compassionate. In fact, this is in our cross-cultural study, had the highest levels of self-compassion in Thailand and the lowest in Taiwan, with the United States falling in between. In all three countries, however, we found that self-criticism was strongly related to depression and dissatisfaction with life. It appears that the negative impact of self-criticism may be universal, even though different countries and cultures encourage it to a greater or lesser degree. A means to an end. If we look more deeply, we see that harsh criticism is often used as a cover for something else, the desire for control. Given that the parents of self-critics are usually overly controlling, the message is received early on that self-control is possible. When parents blame their children for making mistakes, children learn that they are personally responsible for all of their failures. The implication is that failure is an option box that need not be checked. That falling short of perfection is something that can and should be avoided. Surely if I just try hard enough, I should be able to succeed, shouldn't I? Wouldn't that be nice? If only we could wiggle our nose like Samantha from the TV show Bewitched and never fall off our diet, drop the ball on an important work assignment, say something in anger that we would regret later. But life doesn't work that way. Things are too complicated for us to be fully under control, either our external circumstances or our internal responses to them. To expect otherwise is like expecting the sky to be green instead of blue. Ironically, there is also a way in which our desire to be superior is fed by the process of self-criticism. Our self-concept is multifaceted, and we can identify with different parts of ourselves at any one time. When we judge and attack ourselves, we are taking the role of both the critic and the critic, taking the perspective of the one holding the whip, as well as the one quivering on the ground, we are able to indulge in feelings of righteous indignation towards our own inadequacies. And righteous indignation feels pretty good. At least I'm smart enough to see how stupid that comment was I just made. Yes, I did treat that person in an unforgivingly bad way, but I'm so just and fair that I will now punish myself without mercy. Anger often gives us a feeling of strength and power. So when we angrily cut ourselves down for our failings, we have a chance to feel superior to those aspects of ourselves that we judge, and thus buttress our sense of authority. Similarly, by setting unrealistically high standards for ourselves and getting so upset when we fail to meet them, we can subtly reinforce feelings of supremacy associated with having high standards in the first place. When complaining miserably about ballooning up to those size 6 jeans, for instance, or receiving that one minor negative comment from a boss or teacher on an otherwise glowing yearly review, we are sending the message that normally we are very much above average in our success and that good just isn't good enough for someone so used to excellence. When served up with a slice of humor or, of course, cutting ourselves down can be a way of endearing ourselves to others. Better to have them laugh with you than laugh at you, as the saying goes. A great example of this can be found in the opening scene of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. The former presidential candidate takes the stage in front of an enormous audience with an even more enormous screen behind him. And the first words out of his mouth are, "Hello, my name is Al Gore, and I used to be the next president of the United States." By highlighting his failure in a lighthearted way, Gore had the audience eating out of his hand. There is a difference, however, between healthy self-deprecating humor and unhealthy self-disparagement. This indicates that someone is self-confident enough to poke fun at himself or herself. The second reveals deep-seated insecurities about personal worth and value. A self-fulfilling prophecy is our next section. Because self-critics often come from unsupportive family backgrounds, they tend not to trust others and assume that those they care about will eventually try to hurt. It creates a steady sense of fear that causes problems in interpersonal interactions. For instance, research shows that highly self-critical people tend to be dissatisfied in their romantic relationships because they assume their partners are judging them as harshly as they judge themselves. A misperception of even fairly neutral statements as disparaging often leads to oversensitive reactions and unnecessary conflicts. This means that self-critics often undermine the closeness and supportiveness in relationships that they so desperately seek. Let's see. And then she goes on to tell a story about a friend, which if you get this book, but in the interest of time, we'll skip over that. To make things even worse, people who harshly judge themselves are often their own worst enemy when it comes to choosing relationship partners in the first place. Social psychologist Bill Swan argues that people want to be known by others according to their firmly held beliefs and feelings about themselves, a model known as self-verification theory. That is, they want their self-views to be validated because it helps to provide a sense of stability in their lives. His research shows that even people who make strong negative evaluations of themselves follow this pattern. They seek to interact with others who dislike them so that their experiences will be more familiar and coherent. Now you know why you or your wonderful, successful friend or family members keep picking the wrong guy or gal. Self-critics are often attracted to judgmental romantic partners who confirm their feelings of worthlessness. The certainty of rejection feels safer than not knowing what to expect next. It's the devil they know. Unfortunately, a lot of people are all too familiar with this unhealthy pattern. So now we're going to skip to the section that says the way out. So although it's important for us to see our psychological patterns clearly, it's equally important that we do not judge ourselves for them. If you're a habitual self-critic, remember that your behavior actually represents a convoluted form of self-care, an attempt to keep yourself safe and on track. You don't want to beat yourself up for beating yourself up in the vain hope that it will somehow make you stop beating yourself up. Just as hate can conquer hate, but only strengthens and reinforces it, self-judgment can't stop self-judgment. The best way to counteract self-criticism, therefore, is to understand it, have compassion for it, and then replace it with a kinder response. By letting ourselves be moved by the suffering we have experienced at the hands of our own self-criticism, we strengthen our desire to heal. Eventually, after banging our heads against the wall long enough, we'll decide that enough is enough and demand an end to our self-inflicted pain. Fortunately, we can actually provide ourselves with the security and nurturance we want. We can recognize that weakness and imperfection are part of the shared human experience. We can feel more connected to our fellow life travelers who are just as flawed and vulnerable as we are. At the same time, we can let go of the need to feel better than others. We can see through the self-serving distortions that inflate our own egos at the other's expense. And who wants to be stuck in the box labeled good anyway? Isn't it more interesting to revel in the full range of human experience? Instead of trying to control ourselves and our lives to obtain a perfectionistic ideal, why not embrace life as it is, both the light and the shadow? What adventures might follow if we free ourselves in this way? Happiness is found when we go with the flow of life, not when we rail against it. And self-compassion can help us navigate these turbulent rapids with a wise and accepting heart. So our exercise has to do with taking a look at the criticizer, the criticized, and the compassionate observer. For those of you who have been in therapy, your therapist may have done this exercise with you where you have an empty chair, and depending on what voice you're speaking from, you'll sit in different chairs in the room, speaking from those different voices, so that you have the opportunity to really connect with that experience and what it feels like in the present moment. So for the purposes of today, I would encourage you either do this exercise with your therapist or get a journal or a painting or something where you can make it meaningful to you and depict your wisdom, your inner critic, and the part of you that feels judged and vulnerable. So thinking about an issue that either recently come up or one that continues to nag you in your life, you're going to be role-playing each of these areas. And it might feel a little silly to do this actually in a session or alone, or even journaling about it can feel a little silly and vulnerable because we're not used to from these compartmentalized parts of our brain. But what we want to do is have you express openly and honestly from each part of that self, and not tempering it or downplaying it or exaggerating it in any way, but just being honest with yourself. And also noting what your body is like, what you're experiencing, inside, if you're feeling nauseous or tense or anxious, if when you write from a certain perspective, if you're becoming more relaxed or noticing more anger. But when you take, it's easy as I think where I made a little drawing here. So as you can see, I am an incredibly average artist, and I am okay with that. So the way that I did it is just by making a triangle where we have a harsh critic over here, the part of us that criticizes ourselves, and it can be pretty mean. The part of us that feels judged, and up here we have our wisdom. And I did my best to draw a little owl there, wise old owl, and thinking about what our gut tells us, our intuition. The best part of me would say this to my inner critic. It would say this to that part of me that's in that cycle of feeling hurt and judged. So that wisdom is that most important piece here when it comes to speaking the truth. So that wisdom can also be looked at as like a compassionate observer. So if a friend or somebody that you would consider to be wise, maybe you know them, maybe you don't know them, if they were sitting and observing this conversation you were having with yourself, what would they say? What would they do? How would they support you? Because sometimes it's easier to look at what someone else would do if we're not in that place of being able to do it for ourselves. And again, making note of what words a compassionate observer, that wisdom takes. What's the tone of voice? Are they gentle and warm? What's the posture that you're taking on when you're speaking from that voice? And after the dialogue finishes, or after you're done journaling or painting or drawing, reflect upon what just happened. Do you have any new insights about where your patterns come from, new ways of thinking about your situation that are more productive? As you contemplate what you've learned, set your intention to relate to yourself in a kinder, healthier way in the future. A truce can be called in your inner war. Peace is possible. Your old habits of self-criticism don't need to rule you forever. What you need to do is listen to the voice that's already there, even if it's a bit hidden, your wise and compassionate self. So thanks again for joining me on this second week of self-compassion. Next Friday, we'll start on part 2, the core components of self-compassion. So we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of what this self-compassion is about. So have a wonderful weekend and take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next Friday. Bye.
Good job, Emily. Thanks for your great segment. We really enjoyed it. It's a great way to kind of finish out the week, and I know I look forward to it. I am looking forward to the weekend. It's been a very busy week, and hopefully you've had a good learning week, and hopefully the weather turns around for tomorrow, this weekend. I think it will get better. So anyway, just a reminder, we thank Dr. Phil for being in here earlier, and he's had some great tips on taking care of your laptop and equipment. Please, if you're having trouble with your Chromebook or software or getting logged in, or just you forgot your password and you're too embarrassed to come forward with that information, you need to reach out. You need to contact the high school, the help desk there, and let us help you. Let them help you. That's what they're there for. They enjoy helping, and so please do that. A reminder on the lunches. There's free lunches available to be picked up at Cardinal, Covington, and Dakota City on Mondays and Thursdays at 12:30 or so. So it's usually 10 to 12:30. You can pick them up there. And we do have a few select locations that they're doing deliveries to after that in the afternoon as supplies allow. So please check on those lunches. Now, this week was the first week on Thursday they gave enough lunches for the folks to take home on the weekend. So I think there was enough lunches and breakfasts to get them through the weekend if they chose. So that's really a nice thing too. It's an additional feature. So without that, I think that's about it. Keep looking at our social media and the website for information as we get it. It seems to change often lately. Unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with right now. And we are doing our best to pass it along to you as quickly as we get information or changes are forced upon us. All right. Have a great weekend, and thank you